Shri Ashok Chawla, the Chairperson of the Competition Commission of India, Mr. John Pesman, the Commissioner of the Canadian Competition Bureau, Dr. J. Liubeking, Head of Merger Division, and the Director General of the Commission in the European Union, the Chairperson of the Appellate Authority, Justice Singhvi, delegates from various countries, ladies and gentlemen. It's indeed a pleasure for me to be associated with the International Competition Network merger conference, which is being held with India as the host country. I've had a mixed relationship with the competition law and the competition law practice. Mixed because I never got to practice. And it was a subject of intense interest to me. The more things changed, the more they remain the same. Some 15 years ago, I was even then holding the Department of Corporate Affairs, and I was associated actively with the drafting of this law. So I saw at various stages how this law emerged in India. After 15 years, this department has come back to me again. And a lot of water has really flown down in these last 15 years. 15 years ago, the whole concept of antitrust practice and a competition law practice was somewhat unknown in this country. It had emerged strongly in developed countries of the West, because mergers were taking place, impact of anti-competitive practices was taking place not only within territorial jurisdiction of states, but it also had a transnational impact. The jurisprudence itself was building up. And as a developing economy, we were still moderate in our size. And we were trying to break off from the shackles of the past thinking, where what was big was considered to be evil. That was the whole hypothesis of the thinking that brought the original MRTP law in India. So if you become larger in size, you necessarily will become exploitative. And therefore, your ability to dominate a market must be corrected at the very threshold. Now, it was that thinking which prevailed for decades in India. And of course, the threshold event in 1991, that thinking had to change. But we took more than a decade to change the legal framework. And even when we changed the legal framework, whereas it was felt that the basic question which needed to be answered in economies like India was, who do you trust more? Do you trust the government more, or do you trust the markets more? The command and control economies that we saw for almost 3.5, 4 decades in this country, the basic hypothesis was you trust the government more. And that thinking proved decisively counterproductive. Governments could not per se expand businesses. They could expand controls. They could expand their own economic activity. and therefore slowly observing the experience of other parts of the world, we broke off from that tradition and said, let's start trusting the markets. But then the markets are capable of producing their own aberrations. What, therefore, if the markets fail the consumers? And that is how the whole concept of this balancing act of trusting the markets and allowing the markets a free flow of trade and services, but creating a market regulator. And the market regulator keeps a keen eye. He intervenes only when he finds that there is antitrust practice and anti-competitive practice. Dominance per se is not bad. Size will enable you the economies of scale. It's only when you abuse that dominance to exploit the market that the regulator will step in. But the crucial question was, do you at all in economies like India immediately need to regulate mergers and acquisitions? I recollect having consulted many experts in the field, and I think by that time Mr. Dhal has also joined this activity with me. And at that turning point, when we were all looking at this area, many experts rightly observed, let the rest of the act come into force, but defer the enforcement of the merger and acquisition chapter. Our corporates are still not so large. And therefore, the problem of eliminating competition or reducing substantially that competition by a process of mergers and acquisitions isn't a quietly keep reading a large number of the orders that you make. Need to learn from the global experience. When our own corporates are still of moderate size and most of our mergers and acquisitions and our consolidations need to be encouraged to promote size. And therefore, when is it that we draw the red line? You, of course, have your own guidelines for that purpose. The next phase is going to be where tariff barriers have been lowered down, the non-tariff barriers have been lowered down. What are the different yardsticks you follow with regard to manufactured products? in view of the world becoming one larger market and the availability of products available outside India being there, per se, is exploitation within the domestic market so easily possible? But how would you apply the same standard when it comes to services and companies offering services merge? It may be difficult to import those services compared to the products itself. And one issue, of course, is what are the kind of consequences and penalties we impose in the course of our larger implementation of the law. Do we look at the evil sought to be curbed, the capacity of our own economy, and therefore apply the principle of proportionality? There is yet another question which I've raised frequently in my own mind. When the law was being drafted, I consulted some of the commissions internationally, that in a country where multiple sectoral regulators are functioning, how do you resolve the turf areas between the sectoral regulators? If two telecom majors were to amalgamate, would there be common areas of turf between the telecom regulator and the market regulator, the CCI? And therefore, how do you blend the jurisdiction of the two? Now, obviously, jurisdiction in this area is emerging, and I'm quite certain workshops of this kind will give us an immense opportunity to learn from each other's experiences. And when we do that, I have not the least doubt that the learning curve of our own economy is going to substantially increase. I'm glad that in the very first year of, or first decade of its functioning, the CCI is becoming an extremely mature institution. And I'm sure this conference itself will be a great success. And we all will be wiser by the experiences of each other. Thank you very much for having invited me to associate it.